did, yes. What? Why? Yeah. I mean, it's only it's right here.
I know.
Okay. That's right. I'm gonna edit it out until it actually begins. Yeah.
It's also too busy. Hi. 1, 2, 3.
Oh, how are you?
Hello, how are you? Good to see you again.
Yeah, likewise.
Doing good.
Yeah, it's been a good visit. Yeah.
Nice to see you again.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, I'm glad we were making this work today.
Yes. I'm gonna steal candy. All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell them to come to the class.
Like, oh.
Is it okay if I steal Laffy Taffy from the picture of it?
Yeah, it's perfect. That's true. We had safety last week, so we all went to that, but rain. So that's fair. They were ready to go home. Yeah, it's that time of the semester as well, really.
That's the candy. What?
That was
Oh, hi there. Thank you.
This is
Yes, it's a wonderful wow. Nice.
it's done. Alrighty, welcome everyone to the State of Policing and Public Mental Health panel event. I'm grateful for all who are attending in person and online, and those who will be watching later. And most of all, for our panelists, Dr. Borrego, Professor of Criminology and Criminal Justice here at MSU Denver and Colorado Mesa University. Sam Rabins, LCSW, and Program Manager of Denver Co-Responder Program and Crisis Intervention Response Unit at Well Power. And Jason Mollendor, Chief of the Auraria Police Department. I appreciate the time you're investing into this discussion. I will now ask our panelists to introduce themselves by saying what led them to choose their field of work and what their journey was like to getting here today. If you'd like to start off, Brandon.
Absolutely. So, hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. Yeah, so I didn't know what I wanted to do. No, I always grew up being really interested in criminology, criminal justice. My dad worked at the Federal Bureau of Prisons for 30 years, so I was definitely like super into corrections. Tried to figure out. I did 3 different master's programs. Some were in psychology. I was a psych major in undergrad, and then applied to master's in forensic psychology, counseling psychology, and the criminology and criminal justice. Honestly, criminology and criminal justice gave me a full ride to Arizona State, so you kind of have to pick that. I want to be back in the Southwest. I'm from El Paso, Texas. And there I just had some really great opportunities to do internships. One was with the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia. Another one was with the Bureau of Justice Statistics, working on the death in custody reporting program through BJS. So that those are the people who really started death in custody statistics. And started teaching here I am. And started at MSU out of grad school, and that's I've just been here so far. So that's a little bit of my journey, and really enjoy being in the classroom.
Chief Mollendor, if you want to go next.
All right. When I was little, I really wanted to be an archaeologist or a police officer. There are no jobs in archaeology, so I think I made the right choice. I was actually a Metro student. I was going to campus, and then now I got a police department here. I'd already been to the police academy, so I applied on spring break to those board. And I was been 23 years now, so it's been a little while. So I'm a Metro alum, I'm a MSU Denver alum, I'm a community college system alum, and I teach this here. So spend a lot of time here.
Yeah.
I know. Going to launch, I guess. I don't know.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Rabins. I'm the Associate Director of Criminal Justice Services at Well Power and interim Associate Director for Crisis Services as well. So I see a lot of our criminal justice facing teams, like our co-responder and our STAR team, which is the alternative response model, some competency-based teams, as well as crisis services right now, which include our walk-in center and our behavioral health solutions center. My journey, I kind of always knew I'm not from Colorado, I'm from outside Chicago. I moved to Colorado to get my master's in social work, and because I love to ski, and Colorado's way better weather than the Midwest if anyone is from there or have been there. But I kind of always knew I wanted to go into the helping profession of sorts, which is pretty broad. I just didn't really know what I wanted to do. Decided the path towards my master's degree in social work was the best path for me. It really fit with my values and my mission of how I wanted to support people and looking at people holistically, as well as working with people kind of like, for lack of better words, in the trenches. And that really supported what I wanted to do. I needed a job out of grad school, and so I applied to what was Mental Health Center of Denver, now Well Power. Got a job as a clinical case manager and really found my calling in mental health with people experiencing SMI, severe mental illness, or SPMI, severe and persistent mental illness. And really found my calling there. And in 2016, my then boss approached me and was like, how do you feel about working with police officers doing crisis work? I have no idea what it's going to mean, but it might be fun. And I was like, sounds great. And I really enjoyed doing crisis work when I was a clinical case manager. That I really thrived in those moments, in those high intense, high adrenaline moments. And yeah, I started working with police officers and really found a hole in our system of connecting people in crisis to long-term care and support, and felt that this program bridged the gap. And I guess failure to launch also. I've been with Well Power for 12 and a half years, since the day after I graduated grad school, and I'm very happy to be a part of this criminal justice basic portion of mental health.
Awesome, thank you. So I see there are some returning faces. For those who missed our first panel, we discussed things such as abolishing the police, or at least the idea of it, what the implications of that would be, root causes of crime, key principles and theories of modern policing, what works, what doesn't, what should change, and then also the role that STAR plays, and the lack of education the general population has when it comes to civic issues like these. This time, we will focus on how to make systematic changes, racial and socioeconomic disparities, barriers for access to mental health care, overall policy changes, and personal well-being for those in law enforcement and the STAR program. This is a dialogue about civic engagement, policing, and mental health can create impassioned views, and with a particularly divisive election, which just ended, I ask that everybody is curious and respectful of everybody's questions. So while some of the questions will be directed to just one of our panelists, I invite each of them to comment on every question. We'll also open up the panel for a Q&A during the last 15 minutes, and I will ask people to either write down their question or type it into the chat so I can read it, and we'll try to address each question. And then I'll also ask everybody online to leave their camera off, please. All right, so I'm going to start by offering our audience members to voice their thoughts and feelings about the current state of law enforcement and public mental health. Each person will have 30 seconds to a minute to do so if they'd like to speak. And if anybody online wants to talk, please type it in the chat and I will read it aloud. Anybody would like to start?
So I would first like to say that I feel optimistic about this topic. So, hearing from experts and professionals is very helpful in terms of like a layperson perspective on the issue at hand that seems to be like sort of a chronic crisis. That's not too long, but I feel my own personal view. I feel I remember those protests last semester. I remember putting some stress in that wise and seeing two get on campus and seeing this relationship between people, faith, and how that's being by police is just very, very complex. And so I was going through the day, because I'm taking this complexity with very great.
Yeah, I'll also say that I do think a lot about the protests last semester and how I remember a lot of the protesters were saying that to be a police is to be a fascist, essentially. And I think that very easily just leads to an us versus them mindset. And that makes it very difficult to even have conversations about civic issues like these. I really think events and discussions like these are the antidote to black and white thinking. And then, does anybody else have any thoughts they would like to add? Or
Fortunately, due to my late entry, I'm not sure what has been said and what hasn't. But I'm honestly a little bit surprised at the passing of the recent Amendment 130 for increased police funding. I was like, um, like in the circles that I'm in, there's still seems to be like police officers are a little bit on the apathetic side due to loss of public support. But it seems like the public seems to want to actually support them. I thought that was very interesting.
all right, thank you. Alrighty, so I'm going to get started with our first question for Chief Mollendor. What specific training does law enforcement receive regarding the mental health of community members, and how can this training evolve to better handle complex mental health crises?
So there's a lot to that question, right? And I think I will start out by saying, as a society, we are really terrible providing the needed resources for people with mental health issues. And a lot of times in society, when there are issues that we have as a people, when there's no other method, it falls to the police to address. And that's not always fair. So we try to stay ahead of this. We try to provide the best service possible with limited resources and limited staffing and within the bounds of the law. So as we're looking at what kind of training police officers have, one of the best ones is a CIT training, critical incident training, which focuses on how to address specific people with specific types of mental illnesses that might communicate better and help get to a better resolution where you don't have to use force, where you don't have an escalation. But that's not always possible. And I know there's a stigma sometimes. The police officers just are looking for a fight, or they go in to do harm, or they're not patient enough. But the reality is, when you look at the actual numbers of how many police officers there are, how many contacts they make, they do an incredibly good job nationwide and work incredibly hard to solve problems at the lowest possible level, often without the ability to have follow-up services for people that truly need them. And so CIP training is important. There's anti-violence policing, which also can flow into mental health as well. There's de-escalation training. There's force training. There's training that we do every day to help make sure that we can provide the best possible service. And the reality of it is that a lot of it too depends on how people react. And unfortunately, just because someone has a mental illness doesn't mean they're not a danger to themselves. It doesn't mean they're not a danger to someone else. It doesn't mean they're not a danger to a police officer. So maybe about 40 hours worth of content in 30 seconds.
Can I add to that? I think as and I'll speak on Denver's co-responder program, we are the partners to the officers for the day. So we actually sit in the front seat with them. We aren't driving our own vehicle. And we in Denver can ride with any patrol officer. And we also have co-responders. So these are all mental health professionals, typically licensed clinicians in Denver. And so we also have co-responders that sit at headquarters, so work with specialty units too. So it goes beyond patrol. And we also have co-responders with the sheriff's department, the fire department, and medics, right? Because we all interface with these community members who are experiencing some sort of behavioral health or mental health crisis or other crisis, right? Might be related to substances, might be related to needs access, might be related to lack of access to certain resources and support. And they're asking for help or someone's asking for help on their behalf. And so when we started to pair mental health clinicians in the car with officers, we also saw some natural training happen. And that was happened on both ends, right? We were able to receive some probably good training that we needed just in terms of like safety, because we don't teach safety in grad school for social work, right? And we are walking into situations with people who are experiencing crisis or actively experiencing delusions. That most certainly does not mean usually people with severe mental illness are the victims of crime, not perpetrators of crime, right? And sometimes people aren't themselves. And so we want to be aware of our surroundings. And so we learned a lot from them. And I think we also taught a lot to our officer partners, and that spread across all of the police officer departments that we've worked with. And I will say that I've personally seen that success because when I have gone on calls with officers, I hear them using clinical language. I hear them thinking about like how, if I was a clinician, does this actually meet criteria for a mental health hold? What other resources can I put in place for a community member who's in crisis and not just use the hospital or jail, which might have been their only access to resources previously. And so I do think there's some training elements between when we start to add these co-responder programs that we work. I can also say my first week on the job as a co-responder in 2016, I went to the CIT course. It was incredibly fruitful to learn how the officers learned. And that CIT course has also developed over time. So that CIT course does not stay static either. That changes as things change. That's what I've observed too. So lots of training.
Okay, so for Dr. Borrego, from your perspective, what role should law enforcement play in broader systematic solutions to mental health, such as advocating for policy changes or increasing community resources?
Yeah, to kind of go off with what both of them said, and that kind of leads into this question, we have to also understand like the historical context of like where policing and police training came from. So when police training started, it didn't really talk about mental health and these types of issues. So we have people like Chief Mollendor and some other individuals who are willing to partner with these types of programs because they understand it. But you still have to understand as much as think about as much as you know about mental health and say, you're just watch the news sometimes or whatever. I'm not talking about like you read books or anything like that. That's about what police officers know and then a little bit of the training, right? Now we all have in here have a little bit of a baseline because we're in college courses or have had training or teach them or in some way. But very much the education level of what mental health is still very, very, very varied throughout the US. So I think what's difficult is we are fighting this idea of what law enforcement should be and how it developed because of systemic political decisions that were made from people who are not in these circumstances, who are not police officers, who are not everyday individuals, who do not have these experiences firsthand. And they decide, oh, we're going to have harsh punishments for people who are on drugs and all these things. And that leads into then how police are supposed to respond because, again, it's the government funding and all this idea of like pushing it down. That's what I talk about, systemic. That's when you should basically operationalize it or define it, right? So systemic issues are pervasive throughout society that are linked to our political, our socio-political systems and our socioeconomic status. These are just what happens every day. To change those is really hard. Talking about elections, you have to vote for those changes. Then you have the state versus federal. Then your local institutions, right? And all of those fundings are tied, and each state does training differently. Each state approaches things differently. Then you have federal government agencies, so also federal law enforcement. And so there's all these different requirements and expectations put on us by these broader socio-political systems. These were really hard questions because they're good, and how we get to those answers is through more partnerships, I think. And so having police departments willing to partner with these different agencies. So police officers don't just like go around and just like talk to each other here and there. You have like the International Association of Chiefs of Police that get together every year, or all these broader organizations, so like state conferences, just like professors do, and they go. And then even in criminal justice, we have the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences, which will be hosted here in Denver in the spring, which is very practitioner oriented too, to bridge the gap between researchers and practitioners. So it's been the past a couple of decades has been combating this idea of that everything's separate and that we live in a silo. We're seeing the interconnectedness of community, of more chiefs appreciating how we can partner with universities and researchers and clinicians and social workers and bring together. And so those conferences are a way for us to build it. Of course, you then have to have progressive leaders who are willing to put the funding forward So sometimes it is going to be voting. Sometimes it's going to be a chief or a leader who's advocating for those partnerships. It's going to get other people in there and communities that are willing to see the benefit. It's not going to happen by the patience of a community as well. So I don't think I can necessarily answer your question because it's so complex and complicated and interconnected. But I see we all have a role to play. For me as a criminal justice professor, it's for me to encourage our students who want to go into this realm of like being educated, having good ideas, being willing to speak up, being connected to your community, and then leading in and working with people like Chief Mollendor and their team and willing and like having leaders willing to listen in any type of establishment, leadership and that type of thing. And then clinicians willing to step into these roles that are very difficult. I don't work with STAR in particular, but I work with the critical response team inside the Denver Sheriff's Department. And I sit on their hiring committees, and they are just constantly having clinician turnover because it's really difficult to work with people who are incarcerated. And it's not the same people all the time because you have such high turnover in jail. Same with policing. It's not the same people all the time. Sometimes it is. And just like being willing to work in those environments. And like you said, you're not taught about safety. You walk in and you're like, ooh, that was a little scary. Was not expecting that. Is that what I want to face every day? Like, those are really big questions and that someone doesn't actually know until they get in there. So how are we preparing the workforce? So that's where I see responsibilities in universities, responsibilities in law enforcement, responsibilities in like the actual clinicians and preparing and expectations and requirements from the state and politicians.
Yeah, that was very good. Complex, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So for Sam Rabins, in your intro, you spoke a little bit about what STAR does. Could you talk a little bit about what's been working really well so far in the program, what you're planning on doing more of in 2025, and what isn't going very well, and what changes you'd make if that would be possible at all?
Yeah, so I want to define STAR and co-response because they are two different programs. And so I do think it's important because they work together like a marriage in the community. And so I just want to define both of those. Co-response is our clinicians that are paired with your typical first responder. Historically, in larger communities, that typically means they're paired with police officers. In Denver, we've been a little creative in terms of how Denver is set up as a civilian county and have able to have mental health professionals not only with police officers, we are in every district and we are a 24/7 program, but we also are with the fire department, the sheriff's department, Parks and Rec. I think we're the first in the country to have a co-responder with the Parks and Rec department, as well as RTE. So going with transit police on calls. As such. And we, like I said, and I'll use police as my example because we're talking about policing. We're in the car with officers, we're responding to 911 calls where police need to be present, and we're providing that mental health support on those calls. STAR is an alternative response model. So STAR is a separate program from co-response. And although again, they work together like a marriage in the community, STAR is a EMT or paramedic from Denver Health, and this is Denver's program, as well as a mental health professional. And they are a fourth branch of a response. So your historical first responder community response is your police, sheriff, your fire, and then your EMS, so medical. And STAR is considered the fourth branch, meaning they respond on their own as their own unit. And we send people actively to calls that come through 911 or non-emergency dispatch, to calls where police aren't needed. Fire isn't needed. A typical ambulance is not needed. But we can provide that mental health and medical support because they go hand in hand often to community members in crisis. So both are important because we're handling both types of calls and we are making sure that we're contacting and supporting all community members as a result. If we focused on one area, we might not respond to all community members. And so we want to make sure that we are treating everyone with the ability to have access as long as they call 911 or dispatch, right? That's a barrier for people, let's be honest. There are people who don't want to utilize those emergency services. And if someone calls on their behalf or they call on themselves and need a behavioral health response, we will actually provide that. And so the question was, where are we going in 2025? Yeah, so in 2025, we're going. We are STAR. There's goals, right, of making STAR, for instance, a 24/7 program. And there's barriers to that too, right? Service providers aren't open 24/7. And so what do? We do our co-response is a 24/7 program. And we also recognize barriers again because providers aren't open. And so we have to mitigate and navigate the community as we also mitigate and navigate new some new entities within the behavioral health world, like the Behavioral Health Association, changes in Medicaid funding, and so we continuously monitor that, engage, but ultimately we are still going strong in both areas, in both responses, and continuing to provide support to community members in that way as we continue to navigate some of the newness in this field and some, there will always be holes systemically in the mental health world. And so we also, but yes, we are going strong for 2025 and continuing a lot of our partnerships.
Awesome. Good to hear. For Chief Mollendor, in cases where mental health professionals from STAR are unavailable, what protocols or practices can be put into place to prevent escalation during police encounters with individuals experiencing mental health crises?
That's an interesting question because STAR programs and co-responders are fairly new. And this is something that police officers have always dealt with. I don't think this is a rare occurrence for a police officer to deal with someone with a mental health issue. That's every day, multiple times a day. So it's something that is ingrained in the very nature of how we police and how we interact with people that are suffering from mental health issues. And that's such a broad term because it could be somebody that is having an anxiety attack to someone that truly is schizophrenic or has no conception of what reality is. And it's really hard to try to reason with people that are just unreasonable. And sometimes that does lead to misunderstandings. It leads to force it leads to an officer having to escalate the contact because things again maybe aren't going on a path that would normally take place. And you have to remember the police officers don't get called because things are going well. When they call us, it's not because they just had a baby and they want us to hold us. They bought a puppy. They're calling us because something bad is happening and they expect us to make it better. That doesn't always happen. It's not always even possible. We try so incredibly hard to do that, to treat people with respect, to do the right thing, and to serve the community well. And for the most part, we do. There are always going to be problems, and there are with every profession. But the reality is, this is something that we deal with every day. The co-responders are a huge asset because they get to go to that next level where a police officer deals with a situation and they leave. We can't provide long-term care for someone. We can't continually check on them. We can't be that resource for them because we don't have those resources. The co-responders can. They can help connect them with the long-term resources, with the mental health services that are going to actually improve their life and hopefully get them on a path where they can have a more sustainable future. So again, the benefit is that long-term care compared to that immediate response.
And I'll add, sorry, I'm adding a lot to that. I'll add to that too. So like we can't, in the city and county of Denver, there's 27 co-responders. That's not enough for our population that grows to over 1 million on weekdays when people influx into this, right? And we have 16 STAR clinicians total, 8 on each half of the week. Also not enough, right? So there's not enough of us to go around. And we recognize that there are calls that officers go on where having a co-responder, or maybe it should have been a STAR call, right? Depending on the situation, would have been fruitful. And so we do create really positive and fruitful relationships with our first responder peers so that if an officer, for instance, were to go on a call, they do the best they can, we're stuck on a different call, we can't get out there, they may say, hey, Sam, I was on this call, here's the address, here's what happened. I let them know you might give them a call, they were okay with it, can you follow up with them? So even if we're not able to be on the call themselves, we're also still partnering with police officers, with what all the other agencies I talked about, to make sure that that person gets that mental health, that specific from a mental health professional touch if they need it. And we build those, and we do that by building relationships and by doing the work.
All right, another question for Dr. Borrego. When considering racial and socioeconomic disparity and bias factors in law enforcement's handling of mental health crises, what can be done to break down the cognitive bias that zip code likely equates to human worth? Because, for example, in my mind, it seems to me that an officer who responds to a call from Cherry Hills is going to have a very different idea of how to respond and what to do than if they're responding to a call in Capitol, for example.
Sure. Yeah, so this is a little complicated, and I'm going to put it again on the systemic structures of how we've created communities and society. This isn't not on police officers. It's not on any individuals being like, oh, I just choose to live here because I want to live here, and so I'm going to live amongst people who are the same socioeconomic status as me. No, it's again because of the way communities are built. Who's allowed? We've had laws that have made it more difficult for people and people of color to buy houses in certain communities. Or we have here in Denver, we have a housing cost crisis. Like people cannot afford to own their own home. Then it forces them to live in certain communities. So it's a broader, again, systemic problem when we're thinking about how communities organize. And this goes back to Park and Burgess. You can Google it if you'd like to. And the concentric zones and how communities are made and what happened. At first, it started at like inner cities with where industrial areas are, because that's where factory workers were, immigrants, and that's where like you could only get this job. We're still seeing it today, just different areas and how things are spread out, and public transportation and everything. But all of those areas are created because of socio-political decisions by people who, again, are not necessarily connected to our communities. So then zip codes are another social construct. Race is a social construct. So these ideas of who's other, who deserves to have this housing or how they should, and who has wealth in this country has been dependent upon things that are outside of everyday people's control. I want to preface that. So when you are then responding to things, well, let me go back another step. High socioeconomic status and low economic status, people experience things in similar capacities, just it's access to resources. Can you get help for your addiction? Can you get help for your mental health issues? Is somebody going to understand when you're in school? If you're a white individual versus a person of color, are you going to be seen as, ooh, maybe they need some therapy because they're acting out a little bit, or that kid has conduct disorder because they're a person of color, and I'm going to send them to juvenile, and I'm going to call the police on them. So we have these broader structures that have like influenced the way we think about problems being mental health, again, ranging from an anxiety to like schizophrenia to being on the spectrum, not being one touched. And again, even like within neurodiversity, that's a huge new area that we're even understanding. Like that was not a conversation when I was in elementary school, which isn't that long ago. I laughed because a student called like the 1980s and 1990s and 1900s, which technically it is, but it gave me a little heart attack. It's okay. It's okay. So thinking about things and like how long it takes society and research and these ideas and even if we want to accept it, it takes a really long time. So again, a lot of these decisions are social contracts that are then embedded into media, politics, different community members, public school systems, even thinking about, Colorado voted this down, but the school choice, right? That would have had big implications for public schooling. That would have allowed funding to go to a lot of these other charter schools, private schools, all of that, where a lot of kids that are middle to upper class and then beyond, and less children of color, to have more opportunities, have more schooling, and then what do you do then? How do you fund teachers to help students? And then teachers are overworked, and you have to like then be there. And I see this. I've worked in daycares like before I even got here, so I've always been in education in some way. And I've worked in a low socioeconomic status daycare, and I've worked in a higher one. Very different ways, very different like parents you deal with, But I don't blame that on necessarily their individual personalities. It's those, what do they have resources on? What is their capacity to deal with their stress every day? Do they have someone to lean on if they're going to miss their shift and they can't afford to pay for daycare that day? Or if there's a snow day, but they work at a convenience store or a liquor store, and that's going to stay open because, by God, those rich people want to go have their mimosas on a snow day. So I'm just saying there's just like these broader implications, and I'm sorry I'm not giving any solid answers. I feel like I'm just like providing social context because I don't see that some of these things are police problem. I still put it back on what data we're collecting and what's out there and how we can even understand it as a public. Because you said your calls for service usually don't end up in force. But we have no national database that collects every contact that labels it force, not force, and then where does that force go if it ends up. We have media reporting. And the narratives from police agencies and those types of things, but we don't have. And I say this again because that is where I started my master's thesis and my doctoral research is looking at what statistics are available for use of force. And that was 2011. Still does not exist for the entire United States. But you can find how many bikes were stolen. Rest of it.
I will say all these answers are big. So no. So next one for Sam Rabins. Considering the success of programs like STAR, how can we measure both the success of these programs and ensure they receive increased funding?
Yeah, I think it's. I always say it's really challenging to put numbers on a program that's dependent on human nature, right? And so we do collect data. We collect a lot of data, every single contact that we made, and it doesn't always show the scope of work that we do and the actual change that we're making. And I think it also doesn't really show, if I go on a call and someone says, I'm not ready, and I say, okay, I'm going to meet you where you're at. You're not ready now, but maybe you will be, so I'm just going to leave a card. I have no idea if that person called. Sometimes, on a rare occasion, I get a phone call that says, you left me a card and you really helped me. That's happened maybe like twice in my career. But I'm sure that business card with the crisis phone number or the walk-in center locations has helped a lot of people. So it's challenging to measure the full success of programs like co-response and like STAR. And like I said, we do collect a lot of data on what we're doing. And so some of those numbers that I can rattle off the top of my brain because I did not come prepared with data. But with co-response specifically, anytime a co-responder is on a call with an officer, the arrest rate or ticket citation rate is less than 2%. I don't know those numbers before because data collection is really hard and things change rapidly and how calls are coded change rapidly. Might be coded as a burglary and actually end up as a mental health call. And so I genuinely don't have those numbers of what it looks like prior to our involvement. And what I can say is it's definitely a reduction, and less than 2% is really great, right? And so I think that's a huge success and really shows the nature of what we're doing is helpful. We're seeing less people go on mental health holds, which is that emergency 2765 hold that holds people, take someone's rights away and putting someone in the hospital for up to 72 hours. We're seeing more access to walk-in centers, to crisis stabilization clinics, to connection to long-term support or reconnection to supportive care that someone might have, because we don't just want to use hospital beds as our be-all, end-all, because that's not the most appropriate space for every person we're contacting. With STAR, we've added on the STAR Community Partner Network, which is wraparound services that we provide to people. So we know crises don't end the moment our van drives away or the moment an officer and a co-responder drive away. They probably still exist, maybe just at a lesser scale. And so by adding in wraparound services, that's really important because we're saying we care about you, not just in this exact moment, but we actually want to ensure that you get connected to those sort of services that will mean so much to you, especially for, as you talked about communities having access to resources and maybe being resource deserts. We can help bridge that gap by navigating the system alongside someone. And we're always going to meet someone where they're at. We're never going to force them to come to Well Power just because that's where I work. We're going to allow them to choose where they want to go. And our STAR Community Partner Network is consisting of 7 agencies, I believe, at this point. that really support that exact concept too. And so we really are seeing success in these programs. And there's a ton of data and there's reports put up to the community with that data as well. And I think as we look at funding and asking for more funding, we have to look at where do we want these programs to grow, and how are we growing, right? Social work, for those of you that are in social work school or want to go, right? You need someone where they're at. You never say, this is what your community needs. You always ask the community, what do you need, right? And so, for instance, for STAR, we have a STAR Community Advisory Committee that guides us on what the community needs are. It's community representatives. And so we really want to make sure that as we grow and as we ask for more funding, and as we grow the needs of these teams, that we're growing alongside the community and making sure we're effective for that. That's also why you'll see, if you live in Denver, I'm talking about Denver programs. If you live in Lakewood, their programs look a little different because our communities are different. And so we really are trying to match those communities that we're involved in.
Yeah, so we have time for one more question because I do want to give plenty of time for Q&A. For Chief Mollendor, what support is mandated for police officers and STAR professionals to ensure they have a healthy mental state support system?
So police work is challenging. How policing is done or not, you can understand that police officers go through a lot. And they get victimized a lot. They are assaulted, they are called names, they are harmed. And all of that takes a toll as their people do. And so when we look at society now, at the negativity for the last few years, it's been really hard to try to recruit quality applicants. And the reason I bring that up is the best way to make sure you have good police officers, make sure you're hiring good people. I can teach someone to be a police officer. I can't teach you to be a good person. And so when that pool shrinks, so does your ability to find the best people for the job. And talk about long-term health, every officer we hire goes through a strenuous background process, more than almost any other profession in our society, including an incredibly detailed psychological assessment to make sure they're psychologically healthy when we hire them. And we want to make sure we keep them psychologically healthy. You know they're good when we hire them, we don't want to break them, right? And so there's definitely in the past been a stigma about reaching out for help and making sure that you're getting assistance with the issues that we do deal with. Police officers, some of the worst things that communities have to offer. Violent crime and victimization and horrible accidents. All of those things are very traumatic. If people see them once, it can have an effect on them for the rest of their life. Police officers are seeing these things over and over every day. So we're getting better at understanding those long-term effects. A lot of police departments have peer support programs. Sorry, I've been here 12 hours. Peer support programs. So other officers are trained to help connect officers with resources that they need them. So they don't have to go to a supervisor or try to go to a counselor. They can talk to one of their peers who will say, hey, see the things available. And it kind of reduces that stigma. A lot of police departments, including ours, do mandatory yearly checkups. So we need psychologists and all of our staff from the chief down has to go talk with them for an hour. Doesn't mean they're going to get resources, it doesn't mean they need resources, but it takes away that stigma because everyone's doing it. Not one person feels bad about it. And ultimately, then they will pay for whatever services they need. Further than that, that's completely private, completely confidential. Also, as they go through a traumatic experience, we will send them to a counselor and have them what's called a fitness duty assessment, where they verify that even though they've gone through that trauma, they're still healthy and they can still do the job and they're really successful at that. So those are just some of the things that we do to help make sure that they stay healthy.
And one thing at the federal level, so my dad worked in federal prison, but my mom has also worked for the federal government. They upped their mental health and health insurance and all those resources. Like when you get X many free mental health appointments every year, right? And made that available to every federal law enforcement agency. It's a little bit easier at federal level and those types of health insurances. You don't want to get me into health insurance because we're talking about systemic issues here. A little bit harder at local and state institutions because they have less money. But that is one way that some of the agencies are trying. Like, how can we partner to make sure that all of these things are available at little to no cost for employees? So there are a lot of different ways that they've learned. Again, it's been a lot more in the past decade or so that, again, we're understanding mental health, because it's not just mental health of individuals that are calling the police. Sometimes police are the calls, right? Like that can happen, but it's the mental health of practitioners and first responders and just police, EMS, co-responders, all those types of individuals, that it's just really difficult, no matter what happens to you. And I will say, even me personally, my husband was in has traumatic brain injury from a climbing accident last year. I had to take time off because even though I'm just a professor, live here, it was really hard for me to navigate and do all the things I needed to do and go home and deal with someone who could not like regulate his emotions for 9 months. So you have to think about all the different things that come into somebody's life that you have no idea. And I have no children. So you can imagine having to like be responsible for like little beings and that, and like try to navigate that whole thing and work and go to a demanding job and all of those different things. So humanity is one thing that I think is just like the overall, I think maybe a broad theme of this is how do we play in and build better humanity among all of us for better community.
Yeah, can I add one more thing too? And then yes. Yes. And to add on to that, as social workers, as trained therapists, as mental health providers, it is literally our job to take on people's trauma. And that wears at you. It has a name, it's called vicarious trauma, and it absolutely can create traumatic disorders for us, right? I didn't go to social work school and graduate and think I'm going to wear a bulletproof vest to work every day, nor see the things I saw, right? We also all have our own resiliency factors, and we have to honor and respect that too. And so my resiliency factor might be a little bit higher than some other people's, or vice versa. Mine might be lower, someone else's might be higher. And so everyone's going to react differently to the situations, the things they hear, the things they see, the things they smell, right? Like all these senses can come into play when we experience trauma, when we experience vicarious trauma too. And so we have to be really careful of how we also will approach people and honor the fact that everyone has different needs. I think both of the other panelists talked about that, right? That every person is different. And so we always want to do check-in and provide supports to people. It's a really tough, like we talk about, that we're seeing people on their absolute worst day. It is their absolute worst day. I can only imagine what it's like to have to call someone and say, I need help on my absolute worst day. I see that multiple times a day, right? And so that does wear and tear on you as an individual. And to just add to what Chief Mollendor said, we go to the next call. There's no break. There's no time off in between. You go from someone's worst day to the next person's worst day to the third person's worst day, and so on and so on. And you have to remind yourself every single day how to show up for that person. And that is really hard because we are human and we have lives and we have things that happen to us too. And we somehow have to find a way to balance what is happening in our own lives and all the chaos that might exist there, and then all the chaos of taking on someone's trauma. And so this is a challenging job and it wears on people. And we're finally in a place where we are encouraging people to seek support, where we're making things free to access services, right? But we offer free at Well Power, we don't have a copay. As long as we see a in-network provider, I feel like we could have the same discussion on it, right? And that's a huge benefit for us. And I'm so grateful for my agency for doing that. But that's not the case for a lot of mental health professionals, right? That's not the case for your private practice therapist who's also taking on other trauma. And so we really focus on well-being a lot in individual supervisions, as agencies, as partners in the community, because it is so crucial to keep us in this field and to keep us being a support to community members.
Okay, awesome. I will now open it up for Q&A. Again, anybody online, please type into the chat and I'll read it. But if anybody in our in-person audience wants to ask a question, just raise your hand.
You kind of mentioned briefly how it's hard to recruit quality officers. I just kind of want to know what that means. What are the characteristics of these quality officers? What do you
We're looking for people that are caring, that are dedicated, that are trustworthy, that are reliable. I think that any of you would say is a good person is the kind of person we're looking for.
I'm curious what STAR and co-response are teaching us as like a society as a whole about like the possibilities of de-escalating situations and avoiding arrests. Chief Mollendor, you mentioned like attempting to reason with someone who's unreasonable. I'm curious like how often your team interacts with people where your only resort is a conversation. Um, is it usually possible to avoid an arrest, or is that something that the police officer needs to come in?
Great question. Yeah, we use verbal de-escalation all the time. I often teach verbal de-escalation to our first responder partners. I teach at the Fire Academy. I teach at the Denver Sheriff's CIT course. I've taught at DPD, Denver Police. I taught to some psychiatrists. So we're teaching de-escalation. Everyone is craving de-escalation, right? Because I don't know if all of you remember, but in 2020 we had COVID. I'm just joking. We all remember 2020, right? But what happened in 2020 is we all lost access to our normal coping skills. I shouldn't say we all. Some people, their maybe unhealthy coping skills were extra available to them, and some of our healthy coping skills we lost access to. And that's different for everyone, right? Some people really thrived in COVID. It was really helpful for them. And a lot of people didn't. And so we're still recouping from that. And so what we're seeing is people who are still working on trying to find those coping skills. And so the ability to escalate is increased because we don't have other things in our life to bring us back to reality or kind of calm us down, or we're not sure where to access those things anymore because they disappeared and we kind of lost track. And so people are craving across the board. We trained like a dental phone line about de-escalation because they're getting callers, right? And so it's hugely important. And yeah, all we do is talk to people, right? We're trained social workers, we're trained therapists. That's what we do. We talk. Clearly, I talk a lot. I'm talking a lot right now, right? But like, we don't have it. We only have the tools that we carry us that aren't like our verbal skills are we carry tourniquets in case we absolutely need to use them and Narcan. Those are our main, and we carry a police radio for communication. Those are our tools, right? And so we are not, we're not engaging in fights. We're not engaging in physical contact. We are engaging in verbal contact. And so we are constantly de-escalating people. And yeah, I think we learn from each other, right? Like we've learned from our crisis negotiation teams some extra skills that maybe we don't teach crisis negotiation in social work school. They don't teach how to talk someone off of a building, which me and my team have all done, right? They don't teach you that. And so it's a lot of learning on the job and kind of working backwards of how to do this. And so it is really important, and we learn from each other, right? I'm going to learn skills that they utilize, and officers are going to learn skills that we utilize, and then we bring both of those into the field and can educate each other on that. So I think the effect is that having us in the community, and we also have the education background of 2 years, right? You have to go to college, and then you have to get 2 years, spend a lot of money and get a master's degree, right? And then you have to spend another 2 years getting clinically supervised and working with people directly, and then you take a test, and then you get licensed, right? And then you can become a co-responder. So you're doing a lot of very focused mental health work and clinical work prior to doing this. And so we have that background and that training. They have the on-scene experience and the safety knowledge, right? And so we really work together to do that. And as I mentioned earlier, less than 2% of people are ticketed and less than 2% of people are arrested. So we really avoid that. That's our last option.
I can add to that really quickly too. When someone's calling and someone like Sam shows up that's in just street clothes and whatever, they might be more willing to talk to her.
Yes.
Authority figures, right? We already know that there could be, and vicarious trauma is not just amongst them, but amongst community members too. You know somebody that might have been treated. Or now we have social media, right? We first saw it with Rodney King. Everybody saw what happened to him and how that broke out. Now we have instantaneous communications, videos, multiple points of view of what happens, and people form their perceptions off of that, whether or not they've actually had an interaction. So sometimes it is really difficult for someone like, I know Chief Mollendor, I know he likes to go community. I know his team have actually had to call him, for an instance, on campus. They listened to me when I was like, hey, I got the situation under control. They walked in, talked, we got it under control, and then I was like, all right, I think your presence now would be a little alarming. They're like, cool, we'll be outside the door if we need something, right? I know how they are, but someone else will be like, nope, not talking to them. And so that's another kind of perception that you have to like wade through too, and that's difficult. And I would say I'm actually collecting data in the jails to see the different, getting perceptions from the deputies and the clinicians on how they think their jobs are going and how they are working together.
Well, and adding to that, like I have shown up to, right? Like that's so true. Like people have absolute historical trauma, vicarious trauma, depending on who's responding to them, least prior to EMS, right? Right? Like that absolutely exists. And I have definitely, our co-responders specifically have what we call trauma-informed uniform, just so we are easily identifiable in case there was a chaotic scene. But I have definitely showed up to scenes and people are like, I'm not talking to you. And I'm like, I haven't even said a word yet. And they're like, another person dressed like you put me in a mental household last time, and I don't want to talk to you because you're going to hospitalize me again, right? And so that's why I say, yeah, right. It's triggered. And so like we then have to navigate like, oh my gosh, this mental health resource that I have now at my fingertips is maybe not going to be the best resource. Maybe we call Star in because they are in street clothes. Maybe they have a better connection with the officer and the officer does all the talking, right? And so you make that. That's pretty fun.
Also, I'm not seeing any. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I have like a 3-part question. And I want to ask each one first and get answers in the next 10. So the first part is, what is the role of police post-arrest, like when the individuals are in the justice system? And
Well, the answer is easy, which is there isn't. We just don't have the resource for that, and that's not the way our system's structured. So we arrest them, we put them in the system, other than going to court. Our part is done because we go on to the next one, and the next one, and the next one.
So the charges that are actually brought, the police might cite someone for X, Y, or Z. Then it's like the attorneys, district attorneys that decide what actually goes, who's, how they're processed, what they're actually charged with. They can escalate the charges, they can or decrease the charges. Police have no decision making in that.
then my next question is, what are the benefits of incarcerating?
I can try.
That's a good one.
I can try. Sometimes people are really harmful to the other individuals around them or themselves. And at that point, it's not helpful for them to be at home. How we decipher that is very difficult, right? The length of incarceration is very difficult. I would say how our system is now, it's overly punitive and isn't beneficial. Again, goes to our socio-political systems. I am not an abolitionist, but I do believe in decreasing how much time that we do. What are the approaches to certain types of crimes? I'll take the Centoya Brown. I don't know how many of you know her, but she was just released because she finally got her conviction turned over. She was a 15-year-old girl who was pimped out multiple times and decided to kill one of her jobs. She was given life in prison without the possibility of parole. I don't see that as helpful. People will say, well, that's just a one-off. Actually, no, that's a very common type of incarceration for that type of individual. So there are some benefits, right? Obviously, there are people who are abusive, people who have vendettas and have written manifestos and would kill again, or are so those types of incarcerations are necessary. People who are particularly dangerous. Because crime and crime statistics are like an iceberg. We only know this much, right? This much took the Titanic out, or that we saw this much, but it wasn't huge under here. And so we're lacking on because of reporting, because of all the different types of things. So can we do better? Yes. In terms of length, is it beneficial for some people? Yes. Is our system effective the way it is? Some people may disagree. Those are my personal opinions.
To add that a little bit, I'm willing to bet almost everybody in this room is somebody that they're a good person. I mean, all of us, right? It's hard for good people sometimes to understand that there are others that will do harm every chance they get. And those are the people that, unfortunately, we do need to incarcerate. We do need to hold accountable. And hopefully, we can help modify their behavior. Right? We don't want recidivism, but that's not up to us. That's really up to them as well. And so, again, the key is to keep our society functioning and keeping people safe and being able to live a good life. But there's others that, unfortunately, don't share that out.
And we do have programs that people who have been incarcerated, who maybe are likely incompetent to proceed, to get those people out of custody into the community with wraparound services so that we are reducing recidivism. So competency restoration, educating people on what their charges are, competency diversion, which is a program I oversee, which says people who are likely incompetent to proceed, they are safe to be in the community with these wraparound services, and can work towards resolving that and not being rearrested. And so there's a lot of movement towards for those that did get arrested and would most likely benefit from not being incarcerated and for X, Y, and Z reasons. Let's get them. Our jails are overcrowded, well overcrowded. Let's get them out of jail. They don't need to be there. There's no success for those people. Let's have them be successful in the community and reduce recidivism that way.
Oh, thank you. I feel like you guys kind of answered a little bit my other question, but so I'm rewording it from what I wrote down a little bit. Do you think that we're putting enough energy into developing more beneficial systems of rehabilitation, or should we be putting more energy into that? Just thoughts on other forms of, yeah.
I think as long as humans have existed, we've tried to solve that very problem, right? We haven't. So a lot of it is that everything is so individualized. A person's motivations are different. A person's resources are different. A person's value is different. So ultimately, how do we create a cookie cutter approach when there is no cookie, right? When every single person has different needs, a different ultimate use. So to answer your point, it's something that I think we continue to strive for. And we need more resources in the right places. And that is always a hard sell.
We also need more money to have those resources. And that's, I think, the barrier that people often I don't think people forget it, but I think people forget that to run programs, you need funding, and funding is really challenging. It's incredibly challenging. And so the other thing is that my personal belief, we also need we have a lot of intervention programs. Okay, you've already committed a crime, you are likely incompetent to proceed, let's get you out of jail and really work towards not having you commit a crime again, right? What are we doing to prevent that from beginning in the first place, right? And so we need more prevention programs. There's not a lot of but to show the effectiveness of a prevention program, you probably have to do some really long-term studies, and those also cost a lot of money. And so it's quicker to see, I know that when I go on a call, I prevented an arrest. I can see that plain as day. I can show those numbers to my funding sources and I can get funding. I can't show that what I did October 1st of 2016 now has this effect, right? There's also things in place for me even asking. There's HIPAA in place. I can't necessarily even ask how a person's doing after I'm in contact with them. And so, yeah, we absolutely need more. Systemically, a lot of our systems, including the mental health system, is very broken. And there's a lot of holes in the system, and there's a lot of really good people doing a lot of really good work to lobby for change. But that, I think we've all talked about, that change takes a lot of time. That change takes creative thinking, change takes community support, and that change takes.
That's one thing. I agree more. Again, it comes down to, right, there were a lot of initiatives on the ballot. People look at it, affordable housing, and they equate that to allowing people with drug issues or these other things that can afford it, and they're going to bring down their property value, all those types of things. We are good people. Sometimes we lack a little bit of altruism. So I'm going to vote, and I'm going to pay a 15% tax on things that I'm going to buy because, why do I need $100 from Costco without giving 15 cents to something that's going to help affordable housing? There are some individuals that feel like then that those are handouts, right? But we don't think about, again, those long-term historical, socio-political context of how we even got there, and what are those bigger tax brackets that we actually don't vote on. Well, I'm not going to get into it. In a roundabout way, right? When we see these issues as an other problem and not as a community problem, and how are we going to better the people that were around and who are helping and who are contributing to society, then it's really, really difficult to combat some of those narratives. And again, we're fighting, and I'm going to blame criminologists. Some of the rhetoric that started were from criminology researchers saying, "Oh, X doesn't work," or "This is better," and the media was like, "Yes," and those are election years, and politicians are like, "Yes," and we're going to run on that. The nothing works doctrine, the tough on crime, the ages of dare and scared straight, which do not work. Those are preventative measures that do not work. There is data on it. But it sounds good because we look at the way different generations have grown up. I'm a millennial. Millennials are struggling with their self-worth because we have boomer parents that struggled in a different way, right? And then we have Gen Z, who everyone's saying they're too soft. They actually might be the most balanced emotionally people of all of us, because they have millennial parents who are like, we're not going to do that, or, and they're like self-care. So there's a lot of different ways. We do need more, but we also need to change the way people think. And again, I think that's where it comes from. What are we teaching individuals, and not just in universities, but K through 12? What does our education look like? Other countries actually teach about altruism and connectedness and communal care, and we're like, we're gonna throw economic. I don't even know. I'm not gonna touch on it again, because I don't want to get overly political. But there are things that we could do better. Okay. More altruistic.
Yeah, I do have a couple questions in the chat I do want to get to. So from Melissa, how can community members be a part of the solution towards improving the negative bias toward our local police officers?
I think education is important. Policing is one of those few professions where a police officer does anything in the country, kind of anywhere in the world now, it affects on every police officer everywhere. There are between 800,000 and 1 million police officers in this country. If every one of them was going out doing bad things every day, that's all you would see on the news. Or you wouldn't see any of it because it wouldn't be news, right? They're working so incredibly hard. They're so dedicated. But people don't always get to see that because that's not what makes the news. So be informed. You can do ride-alongs with your local police department. Take a day and just go understand what they're dealing with. See how they work. That's doable, right? But very few people actually do. And they get small pieces from the media and say, well, that's how it is. And they don't look into it and actually try to understand what the holistic kind of issue is.
Yeah, another question, unless we all want to comment. No? Okay. Another question from Molly. Is there discussion about other states implementing programs similar to the STAR program?
Oh yeah, we contact and educate and work with local communities and out of state communities. We even had Bahrain, the country, come visit us and do ride-alongs to look at our co-responsive STAR program. So we are having officially an international effect, which is really cool. But yeah, we partner with communities all over the country. We modeled our program off of a program in Eugene, Oregon called Cahoots. We modeled it for the Denver community, but that's who we went to look out, and we tried to spread the word the way Cahoots educated us, and we're always willing to work with, educate, guide, and we will always encourage people to do what's best for their community and show what we do with ours. But yes, absolutely, other states. Denver's big in Colorado, but there's other. We have a STAR program in Nevada that we help support as well through Nevada Fire. So we do have a STAR program in Jefferson County. I think they're developing another Jefferson County program that's more Lakewood area. I want to say, I could be wrong, but Aurora has an alternative response. So there's a ton of alternative response models coming to fruition, which is awesome.
I've had colleagues that were on National Institute of Health gave them a big $5 million grant to do it in Baltimore, the work out there.
Mm-hmm.
So you can look up the Vera Institute, National Institute of Health, National Institute of the NIJ. So they should have a lot of things, government agencies that field and funded some of this work across in different areas. I think in their jails they've had some too in Chicago. Although in Houston, I can say that.
Yep.
At least I've had two.
Yes.
Help Connect. Yeah.
Yeah.
So lots of different places. Again, there's also there's an online criminology conference that's free for everybody, and that's why I've heard of some of these different things. So you can look up just different organizations and things, and you can go learn about it yourself. And then look up some of those think tanks and some other places. Urban Institute as well.
Yeah. And Urban Institute does all of our.
I was gonna say the ones that did your research.
Yep. And when you talked about conferences and how people connect, there is an International Co-Responder Alliance that we go to their conference every year to learn from our fellow co-responders. There's Crisis Con, which is I haven't been yet. We'll probably come next year. Sounds not like something that would be fun, but I think it will be. That we'll learn about alternative response models. We also have the Colorado Co-Responder Alliance. Washington State has a similar where we're just connecting co-responder communities within Colorado so we can learn from each other because we're at least a shared community being in the same state. So absolutely. Building.
Okay, we are over time, which means it was a good discussion, which is a good sign. But I want to be respectful of our panelists' time, so I will end it there for now. So, thanks again for everybody.
Yes. Whoever created those. Oh, wait, I was
I
like,
know.
oh.